All right then, we've come in this morning and found that the track has frozen, much to our surprise. Now this sample was the one that we added 5% brine to last night. We added 5% by weight of water content, so that the water in the sample would have had 5% of salt in it. Now that roughly works out to about 5.5 kilos per metre length of track, or about 1.5 kilos of salt per square metre. Roughly 150 grams per square foot. So it's quite a lot of salt, really. And that's only 5%. Now, 5% salt solution protects down to about minus 1.5, maybe a little bit colder than that. This sample has been in the freezer just this morning. We left it overnight. And as you can see, the temperature down at the moment is about minus 2.8. So despite the salt in it, it has frozen. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what people do when the tracks are frozen, and that is we're going to put salt on it and just see how effectively that defrosts the track. Now this is about 8 grams of salt, so it will increase the salt concentration in the water content of this sample from 5% to about 10%. So again, that would be about the equivalent of 3 kilos of salt per square metre of track. Again, quite a lot of salt. One of the problems I think you get if you apply solid salt to the track is spreading it out evenly. I can do that fairly easily in the kitchen with a piece of paper. I think doing that on a track in real life is going to be really quite difficult. Okay, so that's actually added 8 grams. As I say, that will make the water content of the sand 8% salt. 10% salt. 10% salt prevents freezing down to about minus 6 degrees, something like that. So in theory, this is about minus 2.5 degrees. If we'd started off with 10% salt, it shouldn't have frozen. But that is a lot of salt. That's a lot more concentrated than is in tissue fluids. That's about 0.9% salt. So it is going to have an effect on the dog's paws. It's going to sting when it gets in your cuts, and it is going to rust your equipment. Nothing worse than having your equipment rusted. Okay, so we put the salt on. As you can see, nothing has happened. We could leave this for quite a long time, and in fact the salt wouldn't start to do anything at all until the water on the surface of the sample melted. And it will melt not because of the salt, but only when the temperature warms up. When the air temperature warms up and the surface of the sand starts to melt, the salt will dissolve into the water. Now, when salt is put on roads, people think they should treat tracks as roads. They're not really similar, obviously. And when salt is put on roads, you will see the gritters out at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a winter's day. What they're trying to do is get salt onto those roads before the ice forms, while there is still water on the roads. And that salt will dissolve into the water and prevent that water from freezing. If you put salt on a frozen road, with a road with frozen water on it, ice as we call it, it will do nothing at all. What does happen though on a road that doesn't happen on a track is that cars will be running over that road, and every time a car goes over that road that's got the salt on it, the tyres generate a little bit of heat, and that little bit of heat will defrost the very surface layer of ice and allow water to form and allow the salt to dissolve into the water, and that will start a defrosting process. So putting salt onto a frozen road, as long as there's plenty of traffic on it, actually does help. The other thing, the reason a road is not a track, or the other way around, is that when salt is put onto the road surface, it's put on with grit, and the grit is there to provide grip, even if there is ice on the road. That is not at all similar to what happens on a dog track, of course. You've got plenty of grit already in the form of sand. So you cannot treat a dog track in the way that you would treat a road and expect to get anywhere, really. The closest you could get now is if you ran over that repeatedly with a tractor, but I think the problem there is you just won't actually make enough impression to make any difference. As you can see, the surface is still frozen hard there. The salt hasn't gone anywhere. So, okay, let's go over that with our harrow now and see what we can do. Okay, now the aim is to harrow this a few times. And try and break up the particles of sand small enough that we can actually use the track. As you can see, it's actually very difficult to do that, even when I'm harrowing this very intensely, probably much more intensely than you could do on the track. We still have big chunks. I'm actually deliberately aiming for the big chunks to break them up. Obviously your harrow isn't going to be doing that either. You'll notice there we still have salt on the surface of the sand. I have mixed some of that into the sand now. So what will happen now is that we'll see what happens as this sample starts to warm up. Initially though, I'm going to put it back in the freezer to keep it cold. Now this is the situation that arises when you arrive at the track at 6 o'clock in the morning, find out that it's frozen, put salt on it, harrow it, and try and break up the track and get it into a usable form. If I leave this on the table now, obviously it will warm up, and it'll warm up quite quickly in this room because, again, it's about 20 degrees. That isn't what's going to happen on your track in real life. So I'm just going to put this back in the freezer for 5 minutes, and we'll see what happens.